Goldberg, longtime lawyer for Donald Trump. Thanks for coming on the beat and taking the questions.
My pleasure.
For reaction to that interview, former federal prosecutor Seth Waxman, CNBC editor-at-large John Harwood, and Natasha Bertrand from The Atlantic. Seth, what do you think of what Trump's lawyer just said?
Well, the first thing that strikes me is you have two lawyers who purportedly have a relationship or work for the president, and they're having at each other. You have Mr. Goldberg now criticizing Mr. Giuliani and the steps he's taken, I think rightfully so. But, you know, I've never been a part of a defense team where two lawyers on that team or that have an interest in their client are out speaking ill of each other. So
great point. And do you think that, based on what we know, do you think Jay Goldberg would do that just now tonight without some inkling that the president wants that?
Well, it's funny you say that, because what he just said was that he questioned Mr. Avenatti going out on TV without the approval of his client. So I assume, if you take that to the next step, that he himself had the approval of Mr. Trump to go out and speak ill of Mr. Giuliani, which seems to not be the best legal strategy, or at least you're setting up your own lawyers for failure.
John Harwood, if I'm not mistaken, Jay Goldberg, who, of course, basically handed off to Michael Cohen in this job, came as close as you can come to suggesting that somebody works with the mob without directly slandering them.
Yes, and, you know, I think the most relevant statement he made about his own representation of President Trump was, I think certain things were kept from me. Somebody who was giving the assessments he was of Donald Trump and his fealty to the truth and the law, I think might not have said that. I do think that there are questions about order and coherence within Trump, the circle of people advising Trump. Obviously, Rudy Giuliani, who's been rebuked not only by President Trump for getting facts wrong, but by his old law firm for misstating what was acceptable for lawyers to do. He's not been serving the president well on television. He doesn't seem to have credentials as a real lawyer. Emmett Flood does. He appears to be the most serious person on that team, and I'm not sure what Jay Goldberg's role is at all at this point.
Well, Jay Goldberg says that he talks to the president. He's told me he spoke to him as recently as last month, and he maintains attorney-client privilege. Now, obviously, he is in what you might call, respectfully, an emeritus status. But he's got a longer, deeper connection to Donald Trump than a heck of a lot of lawyers who've come in and out.
Yep.
I mean, Ty Cobb is respected, but out completely, not emeritus. I mean, fully retired from the job. Natasha, as someone who covers this closely, what jumped out to you about what you heard and what sounded to me, again, like a very clear public knock on Michael Cohen and Rudy?
One of the things he said that kind of confused me was that he was surprised that Rudy Giuliani would go out on TV, you know, seemingly unprepared. He actually said, Rudy Giuliani said that he had spoken to the president prior to that interview with Sean Hannity, and that he had gotten the president's permission to say everything that he had said, that everything that he said was above board, that the president knew that he was going to disclose the fact that the president repaid Michael Cohen.
Then they walked it back. So obviously there was something off, because they literally had to walk the part back about the campaign finance piece.
Right, and this is where the relationship between Trump and his lawyers has always been so murky. What exactly does Rudy Giuliani do? Is he Trump's lawyer, actually? Is he just a guy that he talks to on the phone sometimes and tells him to go out and kind of spin a PR strategy instead of a legal strategy? Same thing with Jay Goldberg. What exactly is Jay Goldberg's role here? Does he actually advise the president in a legal capacity, or is he someone else that the president calls up before he goes to bed at night? It's very similar to Sean Hannity. We just don't know.
I think you put it very well. And John, let me pass it over to you, but yeah. I think Natasha puts it very well, diving into the metaphysicality of what does it mean to give counsel to Donald Trump, who is uncounselable by his own bragging, and who says he got into the White House by ignoring most advice, and that is true. Whether that works in court is a separate question. I mean, John, if you have a tailor, but you tell the tailor you want a three-piece suit that's also a swimsuit, even a good tailor will be at a loss.
Well, exactly. And I think Natasha raises the right point about what exactly the roles are these people playing. Rudy Giuliani, in a story about his separation from his law firm a few days ago, said one of the things he liked about being free of the law firm and presumably about being President Trump's attorney was he hadn't been able to be on television for a while, and he really missed being on television. I'm not sure he's giving President Trump any more legal advice than Alan Dershowitz is from television studios. So, again, I am inclined to think that the heavy-duty lawyering right now is being done by Emmett Flood, who we're not seeing on television.
Right. Well, and as they say in court, snap, Seth, John Harwood snapping there at a couple of lawyers who've been known to appear on television. Not that there's anything wrong with being a lawyer on television. Obviously a reference only to you, Seth. Let me read to you a little more reporting on Avenatti, who continues to be in the spotlight, but also with that comes scrutiny. The publication last week of Cohen's banking history could jeopardize his ability to even represent Daniels in court. That's the most sort of live action, substantive piece of what I think Jay was alluding to, which is that there may at some point be actual legal distance between what Avenatti's up to and making sure he could still represent her in the best possible way.
Well, that's true, and he can come across conflicts of interest and step in it if he goes on TV too much. I mean, it is generally the policy of practicing defense lawyers to not put themselves into the limelight, not put themselves squarely within the public discourse, because that could be used against you in a court. So Mr. Avenatti goes out on TV, obviously, a lot. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, unless he makes misstatements, and then he'll have to own up to it or live with it. So, the more he puts himself out, the more he puts himself at risk.
Right, and maybe we should be Mirandizing more television guests, before the segment, so that they understand what they say on television can be used against them. Classic Miranda joke. I'm looking at faces. Yeah, a moderate hit, not a big hit. I want to thank John and Natasha for coming on the show. Seth, stay with me. I want to ask you about Bob Mueller's jurisdiction in a few minutes. We have more on breaking news from the Russia probe. This signal that is being sent today by a judge on the Manafort piece. Should the special counsel be probing donations that came in after November? I mean, the memos we do have suggest one thing, that Bob Mueller is very careful, and he clears everything by the book when he moves past that original authority. But as this probe gets higher and higher up the White House food chain, we're going to hear a lot more about that authority. To dig in, I want to bring in Guy Lewis. He's a former federal prosecutor, and he's worked with Bob Mueller, James Comey, and Rod Rosenstein at DOJ, and Seth Waxman rejoins us. Guy, looking at this objectively, not whether a person respects Bob Mueller or not, but at that original scope, what do you see as clearly in bounds, and which subjects under investigation you think pose some more issue here?
I think, Ari, that your point is so well taken that Bob Mueller will proceed very cautiously, very carefully. Look, he's a conservative guy. There's no question about it. And when he feels he needs to go back and see Rosenstein, see Rod, and have that discussion, have that additional memo, I think that's what he's going to do, to try to stay carefully and closely within the bounds of those authorizations that you just read.
Seth, let me hit you with two of the tougher ones. One, the Victor Veldsberg linked fund payments to Michael Cohen, which are, to use a legal term, super shady, but may not actually be election collusion. And two, the inaugural donations. Would he need, in your view, explicit authority to go for those?
Well, I think that you would have to go back to Rod Rosenstein for those. But the thing I think that's key here is that we are looking at this, the very tip of the iceberg. We're all sitting back trying to predict and judge when we don't have access to the evidence. What I think Bob Mueller has are emails, text messages, bank records, and documents that will tell this story in large part, in addition to cooperators. And so while from the outside looking in, we may say, well, how do Middle Eastern payments tie into the Russia investigation? Or how does Russian funding through Cohen fit into the Russia investigation? For all we know, there are all sorts of emails and documents and cooperators that provide those missing links, and very naturally may fall into this the scope of the mandate, or not, but we just don't know.
Here's Donald Trump picking up this latest point.
On CNN, they have a headline: Judge in Manafort case says Mueller's aim is to hurt Trump. You believe that? This is what we're up. It's called the witch hunt. Let me tell you, folks, we're all fighting battles, but I love fighting these battles.
He loves it. What do you make, though, of Donald Trump seizing on something that, unlike many of the other attacks on Mueller, does have a legal framework, Seth? I mean, in New York, for example, are you of the view that Rosenstein does want to keep most of the Cohen stuff in New York because it's not collusion related? Or, oddly, the more that's leaked out, the more there have been ties back to the money trail?
Well, I think initially that there might have been some space between the two, and that's why it was referred over to SDNY, the Southern District up in New York. But what I'll tell you is that the moment those prosecutors in New York find something Russia-related or something that might go to the Mueller investigation, they're going to turn around and hand it right back to Bob Mueller. So while there is a space...
Right, he's not hands-off.
Yeah, I mean, this is all DOJ, and they'll share evidence and information. And so I don't see, the separation of the two as really impeding Mr. Mueller's investigation in any way if something comes up.
And Guy, final question. When I hold up on the screen this large black box redacted, I mean, this intrigues journalists, lawyers, and I think a lot of regular citizens. This is Rod Rosenstein explicitly giving Bob Mueller power or authority to go after other people besides Manafort, and we still don't know who they are. Do you have any idea, analysis, or leads on what's covered here?
It's so hard to say, Ari. It's definitely an express authorization to expand the jurisdiction of the investigation. There's no question about that. But I would keep in mind, and I'm very cautious about this, we do know that Rosenstein apparently went to the White House and told the president that, hey, you're not a, quote, target of the investigation. So certainly if that changes, that's where you're really going to see the earthquake, the seismic shift in this investigation.
Right, a veritable San Andreas fault line lurking there.
Exactly.
Guy Lewis and Seth Waxman, thank you both.
Thank you.